Our text this morning comes from John's Gospel, chapter 4, beginning with verse 5. So he came to a Samaritan city called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there. And Jesus, tired out by his journey, was sitting by the well. It was about noon. And a Samaritan woman came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria?" Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it was that says to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." The woman said to him, "Sir, you have no bucket, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us the well, and with his sons and his flocks who drank from it?" Jesus said to her, "Everyone who drinks of this water will thirst again. But those who drink of the water that I will give them will never be thirsty. The water that I will give will become in them a spring of water gushing up to eternal life." The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may never be thirsty or have to keep coming here to draw water." And Jesus said to her, "Go call your husband and come back." And the woman answered him, "I have no husband." Jesus said to her, "You are right to say, 'I have no husband,' for you have had 5 husbands, and the one you have now is not your husband. And what you have said is true." The woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you say that the place where people must worship is in Jerusalem." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. But the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for the Father seeks such as these to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know the Messiah is coming. When He comes, He will proclaim all things to us." And Jesus said to her, "I am He, the one who is speaking to you." Just then the disciples came. They were astonished that He was speaking with a woman, but no one said, "What do you want?" or "Why are you speaking with her?" Then the woman left her water jar and went back to the city. And she said to the people, "Come and see a man who told me everything I had ever done. He cannot be the Messiah, can he?" They left the city and were on their way to Him. The word of God for you, the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. Let us pray. Oh God, we are grateful for giving us another opportunity to come here into this place. Grant this day light to the minds that hunger for truth and peace to the hearts that yearn for rest. Grant strength to those who have hard tasks to do and the power to those who have temptations to face. Grant unto all within this place the ability to find the secret of your presence and to go forth from here in your strength, Lord. Amen. I'm told that there was a little boy, after going to bed and being there for about 30 minutes, cried out, "Dad, I need some water." And Dad, being sleepy and wanting to go to sleep, said, "Hush, go to sleep." "But Dad, I want some water." "Son," I said, "go to sleep." "But Dad." "Son, hush, or I'm going to come in there and give you a spanking." Long pause. "Dad, when you come in here to spank me, will you bring me a glass of water?" Have you ever been thirsty? Have you ever been real thirsty? Now, I'm not talking about the kind of thirst that comes when you've been a mouth breather all night, or the kind that you get when you're a jogger, or the kind that you get when you've been out doing yard work all day. I'm talking about real thirst. I think of a story about Joey Mora, who was a Marine, and he was on an aircraft carrier in the Indian Ocean. And he was standing on the flight deck. And no one noticed what happened next, but in the middle of some jet wash, he was blown off the deck into the sea. No one noticed. You're not supposed to survive more than 60 hours in salt water. And it was 32 hours before they realized the Marine was overboard. Now, you just don't turn an aircraft carrier around in the middle of the ocean. You don't do a UE with a big ship like that. But they did send out some aircraft to search the trail, and they didn't find him. It's like finding a needle in the proverbial haystack. You can imagine. Probably easier to find that needle. But here's the really incredible part of the story. At the 70th hour, well beyond the 60 hours of survival, on the 70th hour, 72 hours I should say, two Pakistani fishermen found the Marine floating. And they said he was confused, as you can imagine. He was actually treading water in his sleep. He had taken off his trousers that you're trained to do, and created a vest, a flotation vest. You know it well. And he had that under him, floating asleep, kicking, treading water. And they pulled him in the ship and got him to the officials. And he was taken care of, and he came back to health very quickly. But in the meantime, his family was notified that he was missing in action and was probably dead. About a year later, Stone Phillips had him on NBC and did an interview. And he asked the Marine, "How did you survive that?" And he said it was the raw will to live. And he said, and Philip said, "Well, what gave you that will?" He said, "The voice of God whispering in my ear, I'm not through with you yet." And Phillips then asked, what was it that burned in your soul so much? Was it a missed plan, a missed objective, some goal you wanted to meet, some place you wanted to go to? What was it that burned inside of your will to live? He said, the ache in my mind for a glass of cold water. A glass of cold water. Have you ever been thirsty? Really? Have you been thirsty? You've heard me now talk about Paul Love, my high school football coach, several times, and I may have shared this story with you, and forgive me if I have. But Coach Love was pretty sadistical. His favorite coach was Paul Bryant, Bear Bryant. Okay, and if you remember Junction Boys, the movie or in the book Junction Boys, where Bryant was out in Texas and he made those kids suffer out there in the desert. And Paul Love, my coach, used that as a Bible, that story. And he took it even further. He wanted to make Bear Bryant proud. And so we would have 3-a-day practices in the summer, 3 hours long. And in the summer, it's 102, 103 degrees here in South Carolina. And it's, there's no telling how hot it is under the helmet and shoulder pads. And we'd have those 3-a-days, 3 hours each time. Every now and then, Coach Love gave us a break, and we'd only have one session. It lasted 9 hours. Now, the sadistical side of Paul was that we didn't get water breaks. Bear Bryant said that water was a sign of weakness. It was an indicator that you were really a loser. So, Coach Love never gave us a water break. To make it worse, there were water fountains in each end zone dribbling water that we were not allowed to drink from. And I remember one day we were being punished for something, and we were running, we were exhausted. And, of course, every time we hit an end zone, there would be water there that we ran through, and it was gushing. You could hear it when we'd go through it. And, of course, all of us imagine what it would be like to be in that water. And then one time we were going through the end zone, and Robin Duckett, bless his heart, he was a fella, he was born blind in one eye, and he was pigeon-toed. And in the middle of that watery area in the end zone, we heard him fall, splash, into the water. And we're all thinking, that's what we want to do. I can get into that. But we were terrified and mystified and dumbified what happened next. We heard the sound. He sucked up all that muddy, grassy, bug-infested, cigarette butts-laden water. There's no telling how much fertilizer was in it. Have you ever been thirsty? Really? I'm not talking about the kind you get when the Coca-Cola bottle comes on the commercial and it's sweating, and you get up and go and get one out of the fridge and come back and sit down and watch TV. I'm not talking about that kind of thirst. I'm talking about the thirst that makes your tongue cling to the side of your cheek. The kind of thirst that makes it difficult to swallow your own spittle. I'm talking about the kind of thirst that cracks the tongue and makes it bleed. Have you ever been thirsty? I remember Paul Love, one last story on Paul, promise. We went and scrimmaged Camden Military. You know where that is? We went and scrimmaged Camden Military. And we didn't do so well. And we got back on the bus, and it was like 2 p.m. We get back on the bus, and in the rear of the bus are stacks of coolers with our food and drink in them. And he makes us sit on the bus with our uniforms, practice uniforms, and helmets and shoulder pads still on, will not let us take anything off. Now, mind you, the buses have been sitting there in the South Carolina heat all day, and he would not let us put the windows down. And then we go out on the I-20, and we hear the back door open, and we turn around to see him kick the coolers out the back door onto I-20, and our sandwiches and our drinks scattering in the wind. You ever been thirsty? Real thirsty? You know, our Bibles are about thirsty people from beginning to end. People who were hungry and thirsty. And it's a story from Genesis to Revelations of people who think they know how to satisfy that hunger and that thirst. And they really don't realize that the hunger and thirst that they have is not a physical thirst, but a spiritual one. Sounds sort of like today, doesn't it? When we're in our postmodern society, when we have this hunger and thirst, and we're grabbing and we're getting and we're doing everything we can to satisfy this hunger and this thirst, from alcohol to drugs to food to experiences, trying to satisfy a spiritual problem with a physical solution. And it's not working. And people, more and more, are getting hungrier and thirstier, while at the same time more exhausted, trying to feed the hunger and satisfy the thirst. Jesus stumbles on to a well. And I got to go to this well several times, and first saw it in the 80s, and I really appreciated it because it's one of the two sites, Garden of Gethsemane and this well, that's been proven archaeologically to be what it says it is. And so I was really excited about getting to see it for the first time, and I sat down on a well curb there and imagined this very story. And Jesus, he's been traveling, he's tired, he's thirsty, and he sits down there by the well. And evidently there's no bucket there. Each person brought their own retriever. And I think back in my childhood days when we had the bucket in the well behind the house, and we cranked the bucket up and filled our basins to carry into the house to drink. And it's sort of like that, but each family had their own retriever, barrel, bucket, whatever you want to call it. And he sits down there, and there's no way for him to get the water. And there in the middle of the noonday, comes this Samaritan woman. Why is she coming in the middle of the noonday? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You see, women in that society had no value. Your only attribute, or your only value, was to be married, produce children, and then rear those children. You could not own private property. You couldn't even divorce your husband. Your husbands could divorce you, but you could not divorce your husband. You are at the bottom rung of Jewish society. Culturally, socially, economically, and religiously. You're at the very bottom. Last week, we saw the very top of Jewish society. Remember Nicodemus? Wealthy, powerful, leader. Yeah, very top of society. This week, we get the very bottom of society. And not only is she a woman, she's a Samaritan. And Samaritans were seen as being subhuman. Why? Well, remember the story? When the Assyrians and the Babylonians took the artisans and the intelligentsia back to Assyria and Babylon, they left behind those less desirable folk. And both the Assyrians and Babylonians, they had a little trick. They would take people from other areas and transport them back there and insert them in that culture or in that community. Well, the Jews that stayed behind intermarried with the transplants. When the remnant returns from Babylon, The Samaritans asked, could they help rebuild the temple, and they refused because they are half-breeds. They've sold themselves out. And the Jews who came back saw them as less than human because they have betrayed the faith. So the Samaritans actually built their own temple on Mount Gerizim. Now, Mount Gerizim to them was where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac. The Jews in Jerusalem says, no, that was on Mount Moriah, and we built the temple there. So they have a rival temple, and the Jews in Jerusalem are angered by that temple there on Mount Gerizim. It's so bad that a Jew would not let the shadow of a Samaritan cross their shadow. If it did, they saw themselves as being contaminated spiritually. So not only is she a woman, she's a Samaritan woman. And not only is she a Samaritan woman, she's a divorcee. 3 strikes. She's a divorcee. She's been married 5 times. Well, guess what? She didn't initiate any of those divorces. Those 5 men put her on the doorstep. And now she's just kind of given up on romance. Sort of like Elizabeth Taylor. She got married, 7 times? She just gives up on romance. And now she's just, to use the vernacular, she's just shacking up with a guy. She's living with someone. And she comes that day at noon. Why at noon? Because she has those 3 strikes against her. And she knows those other women, the socially acceptable women, they come early in the morning when it's nice and cool, where they don't sweat or perspire. And if she were to come in the morning like they do, they would give her that sneer. They would give her that look. She would hear their little commentary behind her back. So to avoid all that, she comes at noon to fetch the water for her household. And then on this day, there's a man sitting there. And I can imagine, you could tell that he was a Jewish male because the way he was dressed. And I can imagine she was a little bit put off by that. I imagine she kind of soft-stepped her way over to that well, not knowing what this Jewish male is going to say to her. But he asked for some water. And she's kind of put out by it. Who are you to be asking me, a Samaritan woman, for water? And Jesus says, if you had known who it is who is asking for this water, you would ask him for water. In other words, physical, spiritual. Physical, spiritual. She sees physically, and he is seeing spiritually. I can imagine as she walked over to that well that she wanted to be seen by somebody. Have you ever been there? I remember the loneliest I would ever have been in my life was standing in Cleveland, Ohio, in the middle of winter, with a winter squall coming in, standing there waiting on a bus, getting splashed by every taxi cab that went by, and people walking just as fast as they could to get wherever they were going, and I didn't know a one of them, and no one knew me. I felt utterly alone. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a homeless person here at Myrtle Beach, and I point blank asked him, I said, what grieves you the most? And I was expecting, having to sleep in the woods, or not having enough to eat, or not having proper clothing. I was expecting all those answers, and he said to me, people not looking me in the eye. People not recognizing me as a human being. Think about that, folks. We just walk on by as though they don't exist. And they're people with feelings, people with needs, There are broken souls there. Now think about this woman at the well. I imagine she wanted to be seen. She wanted to be recognized. And she has no pretext about herself. She's given up on all the pretexts of being socially acceptable and religiously acceptable and all those kinds of things. She's famished. The tongue is parched and cracked. And I'm not talking about the body. I'm talking about her soul. And I think about our situation today in postmodern America. We have more to experience, to physically eat and drink at any point in human history. And we're starving to death. And we're thirsting to death. Not physically, but spiritually. And we have people out there, maybe you played that game yourself, out there you thought that things and stuff and experiences would satisfy the hunger and the thirst, only to find yourself more hungry and more thirsty after you did all those things. Well, people are like that today. You can see it in the viciousness of the anger. I watched the bridge is out down on 17 King, going in where the King 17s come together. What's the name of that? The bridge. There's a detour down there. I watched a man get out of his car and pull another man from his car because he was cut off at the intersection. I stepped out and they both got back in. I don't know what that means. I just didn't want to see anybody get hurt. And I guess they didn't want to get hurt either. But you see it in the rage. The hunger, the thirst is in the rage, in the anger, in the lack of civility. And you know, when you're not civil, you can't have civilization. Civilness is the basis of civilization. And it worries me. Does it worry you? Yeah. And here's the indictment. The more the world has moved to this physical, needy state, the more the church has retracted from it. I don't know what it was. I don't know how it began. I don't know why. I got suspicions. But we've pulled back. Maybe we don't want to be called Bible thumpers or religious fanatics. Maybe we want to be seen as progressive. I don't know what it is. But we've retracted, which has caused another vacuum, and it's getting worse because we have retracted from the world. If we want things to get better, we got to get in there. We got to get a part of this. We got to show people where the water is. We got to tell them what water to drink. You remember old Robin Duckett? Yeah, they're in the trashy water, sucking on cigarette butts and bugs and grass clippings and fertilizer. We need to show them where the living water is. If you've drank of the living water, show them where you got it. Show them how you got it. Let them drink. Hold the cup for them and let them drink. I'm going to close with this. You know, what's amazing is, and I've missed this for 40 years when I went back and looked at this text. Jesus calls her woman. I just kind of passed over that. And I went back and I was looking in the Koine Greek. I was reading the text again in the Koine, and a word jumped out at me. And the word there is goon, G-U-N-E. He called her goon. Goon. Do you know what goon actually means besides just woman? In the Koine Greek, it means special lady. Special lady. And it's a title that he gave his own mother, his sisters, Martha and Mary. He was hanging from a cross and gave his mother the word goon, a title goon. Special lady. Here's a woman, a Samaritan woman, married 5 times, living with another man, and he calls her special. My, oh my, what would happen in our society if we would look at each other as being special? That Jesus doesn't just say it. You know, we have a way of saying things we don't do. We say things we don't practice. Not only does Jesus call her a special lady, he treats her that way. He treats her in a special way. And I think we're called to do the same thing. Just like Jesus with the Samaritan woman, every day we encounter people who don't expect all that much from us, just like the homeless person. They don't know you're a Christian. They don't know you at all. But in every encounter we have during the course of a week, there's the possibility of nurturing somebody, of helping them heal the brokenness in their souls, to bring nourishment to their souls, to bring a quenching water to their souls. God has given for each one of us, for me, for you, this plan for us to be a blessing. Jesus says that to her, to the woman at the well. Go share the water. And she does. She becomes the first living evangelist. A prostitute, by law, becomes the first evangelist, and she's the first person he acknowledges to or exposes who he really is to, the Messiah. You got to be pretty special, don't you? And everything you need to be a blessing is right there if you will look around and see it. When those people, when you go and sit down on the well curb with somebody this week, or you're sitting on the well curb and they come and sit down beside you, you've got everything they need to be healed. Offer them. Share with them. Give them the living water that will not only quench the deeper thirst of life, but will transform it. Will change it. Will alter it forever. Amen.
Thank you again so much for joining us this morning. If you'd like more information about our services, please visit our website, which is FUMCMB.org, or call our church office at 843-448-7164. Thank you.